We are 4 months to the elections, but there's a conversation that has been brewing for the last few weeks. It was started by a former Deputy Finance Minister, Kweku Kwate, and we are taking him up on that challenge. He wants a radical reform in the way politics is done in this country. Rarely would you see a member of the ruling government, somebody who holds a position in Parliament. Until very recently, he was the chair of the very powerful Finance Committee, has recently been reshuffled to the Economic Committee, was until 2021 the Deputy Finance Minister, was in fact after 2021 giving a nomination, an appointment as the Minister of State at the Finance Ministry. He turned it down because he believes he really wanted to stay in Parliament and attempt to change the way politics is done from within. In doing so, he's put out an article last week. I sat down with him and we spoke, and he was very candid about the way he believes things have gone with his own party, but with politics generally. It was him who said that both parties, the NDC and the MPP, have run the economy like a Ponzi scheme. And I put it to him that isn't that an indictment on yourself, because you were there as a Deputy Finance Minister? And he did not bat an eyelid in admitting that, yes, it is a reflection on him too. But that is why now he's speaking out. And he doesn't want the party to get out of power before he does so. He wants to do it now. And a few things he said that gives great pause for thought. Since he spoke, we've seen many other key stalwarts in the party also come forth with their own views on this. But with 4 months to go, the December 7 elections, we need to have that conversation. Is it time to change the way our politics is done and elevate this conversation above the bickering and the name-calling that we see as we approach the elections? Big conversation we must have. The substance of the issues, we are grateful that over time, since 1992, we have become a bit more focused on the issues when we campaign towards an elections. But there's a lot more still that needs to be done. Things such as Kweku Kwate was talking about that affects the lives of ordinary people. He says the whole issue about governance is made about the people themselves and not the politicians, and not about the people. And he wants some soul searching among politicians from both halves of the divide, the NDC and the MPP. He's challenging both sides to tell him that he is wrong when he says they have both failed. And the data is telling us that indeed people, young people, feel that politicians have failed them and that democracy is failing them. And that is why we need to have this conversation before it degenerates into something that we saw, for example, in Kenya, with 4 months to very major elections indeed. Now, that's him there. He was asking that the first thing that the party must do if they want to break the eight is show remorse. He says they must own up to the failings of the MPP, not only the MPP, but failings of past governments. Because really, people are painting all politicians with the same brush. And he makes the point that that's why you see the 4-year cycles. After 4 years, because the people don't have a choice anyway, NDC will go, NDC will come, and the people are getting tired. And that is the point he makes. But very recently, we've also heard from this gentleman here, candidate Japan, who is asking the party to apologize. Apologize to Ghanaians, that don't go out there pretending to campaign, because they will not listen to you unless you apologize, because things have gone wrong. But let's put in a context. Is this being said now because you have 4 months to go and there is some political capital to be gained from speaking like they are speaking from within the party? Well, you can ask that question about the two of them. But what about Nyaho Tamaklo? He has nothing to lose. He has no skin in the game. He's already criticized the president, the current government, the current president. But he's also been saying the same, that the strategy must change, that politicians must show remorse. They must not pretend to be lords over us when we employ them. And they come into government, they simply do what they want. Well, so 3 stalwarts of the MPP all singing from the same hymn book. Did that have an impact on the finance minister's apology yesterday? We'll ask that question and talk about it. But he makes a point, and he summarizes it very simply. bad politics, and economic mismanagement. It is really at the heart of why we are where we are, and you cannot help but agree with that conclusion. Our politics has been bad for a very long time. And coming with that is economic mismanagement. You don't have to look far. That's why, on the average, after every 3 or 4 years maximum, we are back to the IMF because we are having bad politicians who are propagating and implementing bad politics across the board, and that translates into economic mismanagement. The evidence is there for all of us to see. And I was listening to John Dramani Mahama in 2014, just at the time when we were going to the IMF, and he was making the point that this is the last time we're going to be going to the IMF. This is the last time. And they're putting stuff in place for that to happen. Right? Entry back at the IMF, even under worse circumstances than we saw under John Dramani Mahama. This is the worst. Domestic debt exchange, pensioners have been hit. So clearly something is very fundamentally wrong with our politics that is feeding into the economic mismanagement. That Kweku Kwarteng, he was there, remember? He was there. He was the deputy finance minister. He knows what he's talking about. So let's have a conversation. Let's start this ahead of the elections. And listen, the data is showing this. The data is showing. You look at the Afrobarometer. What the Afrobarometer is telling us across the continent, though, we are not, this is not an isolated incident in Ghana because we saw what is happening in Kenya. But this is the story. More than 50% of people that they survey said they are accepting of democracy when leaders abuse power. But that's on the continent. It's not strong. But in Ghana specifically, the story is even more dire. When you ask the question, satisfaction with democracy, you only have 51% telling us that they are satisfied with democracy. Well, when you go back, it was 74%. So that is a significant drop there that we need to pay attention to, of 23%. This isn't good enough. Something fundamental is happening. People are disillusioned. In the same studio, on the same show, when we did the Youth Manifesto, the young man and a woman who joined us from University of Ghana, one of them physically challenged, they told us in no uncertain terms that they have no faith in the politicians. They've lost trust in them. They don't see their use, and they will rather not vote. One of them said they will rather not vote at all. They just have reached that point where they don't want to do anything with the politicians. And that sentiment we're seeing and hearing a lot in our just turned 18 program that I've been doing across the country. And that is reflected here, satisfaction with democracy. And then you come to the other subject of rejection of military. When they first did this, we're talking about 86%. We're talking about 68% now. More people, less and less people now reject military rule. Why? Because they see NDC and MPP as both failed alternatives, and they don't have any other option. So why? I mean, if the military guy will step in, why I will entertain him? This is a worrying part of this. And that is why this conversation we must have. When you look at that drop there, 18% is indeed one that we need to look at. And so was it a surprise when, after we've heard from Kweku Kwarteng, who, by the way, was there with him, was there at the finance ministry as a deputy finance minister, we've heard Kennedy Paul, we've heard all of them say, apologize, apologize, change the way you're doing politics. We hear from the finance minister yesterday who says, forgive us. Forgive us for what? For the domestic debt exchange, for running down the economy. Yeah, he was very specific about the domestic debt exchange and the pain it cost, but in that apology and that appeal for forgiveness also is an admission that things have gone horribly wrong. I don't know if you've listened to him. It is very refreshing, I must say, to have a finance minister. By the way, he wasn't the boss at the time that a lot of these things happened, but he's there now, and he's taking the responsibility to say sorry. This is what he said.
The domestic debt exchange program was a very successful program, achieving 95% participation. And on this note, I would like to appeal to the people of Ghana. to forgive us. To forgive us. It is never the intention of any government to impose hardships on its people. More so, the MPP government that has demonstrated that we want to reduce the burden of the Ghanaian people.
Finally, some humility, some eating of humble pie, some acknowledgement of the economic mismanagement that Kwaku Kwarteng talked about. It is refreshing to hear a sitting finance minister. It's very rare. So it's commendable. We must commend him. It would have taken quite a bit of effort for him to do what he did yesterday, but he did it. Is this the start of something? Or is this just pure politics? Because we are 4 months to a major elections. And how much should we read into what we just heard there from Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam? And by the way, he used to be in civil society. So he knows that this is how you govern when people place you there and they sign a social contract with you. When you fail, acknowledge it, right? He's done so yesterday. But it goes beyond apology. It goes to the very way we practice the politics and run it in this particular country. Something fundamentally must change. Will the politicians do it by themselves, or we, the people, must force them to do so? At least the noises coming from within, the politicians among themselves, is great. There's some acknowledgement that there's something that's gone horribly wrong. To hear a finance minister say, "I'm sorry, forgive me," is some progress. It hasn't moved the needle yet. What will it take to move the needle, to elevate our politics? My guests will join me. This is something they've been doing and talking about and researching on, and they are seeing the trends across the continent, and everybody's worried. We don't want to wait to get to Kenya before we start acting. They'll join me for a conversation. Stay with me after this. And thank you for staying with us here on PM Express. It's always brought to you by Syntex Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. And Syntex Tank is a tank that offers you a bespoke services. They offer you tanks with warranty 7 years. Nobody else does. You want to call them. They are nationwide. 0244-335-168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. My guests are joining me. In the studio with me tonight is Professor Bafo Ejimendua. He's a former UN Senior Governance Advisor. And he joins us for a conversation on this. This is a conversation that's dear to his heart. He's been talking about it for so long. It appears to be getting some traction among the politicians, but you need to ask the question, the politicians, are they motivated by the elections or they're being genuine? Then we have Professor Godfred Bokwe. He is an economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. He joins us on Zoom. He's also been talking about this for quite a while. Because of its economic implications for all of us. And he is key to this also, and we'll hear his thoughts. Dr. Kojo Asante is the Director of Advocacy and Policy Engagement at the CDD Ghana, and he is with me in the studio. And Dr. Asante, let me start with you on this question. I just, when you, I don't know whether you read Kwaku Kwarteng's piece last week. What were your reactions to when you first saw it?
Well, we've had moments of reflection like that from different politicians. I mean, Kwaku Kwarteng is always, I at least from my personal interaction with him, I found him as a very decent politician. I think he's always been a very good communicator. He's always pushed more than just a party or sort of a regime agenda for when it comes to economics. So I've always liked him, and I think over the years that he's been in politics, there are many moments where he's lived his own sort of principles, either sort of rejecting a position or, those kinds of things. There are not too many politicians that do that, so he stands out.
In this case, I mentioned it to him, he was elevated from deputy to minister of state, and he turned down the minister's position.
I think even, I know even when the whole issue about the time that he was, I think he was deputy, and then they moved him to Parliament, and there's always been an effort on his part to make the point, because in this place, turning down a ministerial position is a big thing for a lot of people. So it rarely happens. So at least that's my personal, and I wouldn't say I know him so personally closely, but at least having interacted with him over many years, I've been in work with Parliament and other people. So I am not surprised it's coming from him. But the question I ask myself is two things. Are we ready to change? And particularly the political class. Are they ready to change? And if they don't change and they want to continue to do the kind of politics that they are doing, how are we going to restrain them? And these are two different questions, because ideally, we don't want to go to the extent of having to put in mechanisms and layers of regulation and enforcement that never happens. Ideally, we would want our political class to be true Democrats who are committed to democratic governance, who are disciplined. They are committed to good governance, because one of the things that has been established over the years, and Professor Balfour here, edited a book on the governance of the Fourth Republic. What was very clear is that you're not going to have development in a democracy. You're not going to have development if you don't have good governance.
Okay,
that's the link. So you cannot just go have an election and then expect that in the process of governing, you completely misgovern, or you are indisciplined, you are reckless, and then somehow at the end, you will get development. And this is the kind of game that we have been playing, for a long time. And it's gotten worse over the period. And of course, there are reasons, there are drivers for this. But the question we ask is, our political class willing to change?
Let me put that to Prof. Prof, you've seen enough, more than all of us on the show, to convince you. Have you seen enough to convince you that we've reached a point where the political class may be willing to change?
Well, the fact that Kwaku Kwarteng has come out boldly to make this statement that we are discussing, for me, is a strong indication that at least some of them, maybe fewer this time, but some of them are beginning to listen. Because is there clearly, we all see that after 30 years of this kind of democracy that we have, we are not moving forward. Like he said, it's become nothing more than electoral democracy. Anybody who praises Ghana for being a democratic society, the praise is solely based on the fact that we successfully conduct elections despite those issues that we have, and we change government peacefully through elections. That's the success we have gained. But in terms of the dividends of democratic governance, we haven't seen much. Because look, ultimately, people want to see their well-being being enhanced through the politics that we have, meaning the economy getting better, employment being available, relatively speaking, people going to work, getting some decent salary, being able to take care. I mean, the basic things, the bread and butter issues of life. That's the bottom line. So if you have a democracy and your economy slips all the time, your people are not going to be happy with it. And I think that's the challenge we have. So for Kwaku Kwarteng to come out boldly, and I like his statement. First of all, unlike many other politicians we have, he just told us, as a people for 30 years, he's not singling out his party or the other party. But I think the totality of our efforts have not been yielding any results. And therefore, we need to change the trajectory of our politics, because politics tend to determine the economy. So if the politics is bad, your economy ultimately will be bad. Yeah. And that's why we're experiencing. So when he used the term of Ponzi scheme, he is right. Because any government that comes to power, any party that comes to power, NDC, what do? You go borrow and borrow and borrow. Little emphasis on domestic production, which should be the basis of our development. Certain things that we can do ourselves, we can produce ourselves. Governments are not putting priority on those issues. So we even import toothpicks. And I'm not saying it. Politicians say it, but they have been voted to think and act for us together with the input that we provide in discussions like that. So if a politician comes to tell me, we need to do this A and B, I ask myself, who needs to begin? You have been given the power, the resources of the state, to make decisions based on the popular inputs that you get from the people. Make the right decision for us. But we are not seeing that. Once they get into power, it becomes more of a parochial and exclusive kind of policies. That
you make a very important point, because when you hear them in opposition, they seem to say all the right things.
Correct.
And they have all the solutions. And Prof. Bokun, let me bring you in here. And yet, when they come into power, you look at their manifesto. Kojo and I were talking about it, just before we came on air. They have all the, in opposition, they have all the great ideas, and then they get into government, and the difference between the opposition and the guy who now comes to power is night and day. You've been looking at this through the economic lens. Give us your thoughts on why we constantly find ourselves in this boom and bust. Is it down to, as you agree, the link between the quality of leadership and politicians that we have that leads us to these economic challenges that we constantly face?
Okay, thank you very much, Evans. Good evening. Good evening to Professor Bafo. He is my boss. I admire him so much. And then good evening also to Kojo, Dr. Asante. It's really an honor to share the same platform with people we admire from afar and very close. And good evening to our cherished viewers. Yeah, so I think that under the Fourth Republic, we have enough evidence across time to come to this conclusion. And if you examine the data, you cannot disagree with Honorable Kweku Kwarteng substantially that we need a reset. And I agree with Professor Bafo that the democratic dividend has not trickled down to the ordinary Ghanaian. The democracy we are practicing has benefited a tiny few, and largely the political class, elites, and probably top public officials. That is what we have seen. Increasingly, there's a growing dissatisfaction for our democracy because typically, and as Professor Bafo said, our democracy is reduced to elections, and the electorates also prepare for that. They all try to maximize their returns during the election year by collecting money from politicians and all of that. So that is what is happening. Beyond that, then once they win, on the average, what we do is that we use the poor and the electorate only as a care of, right? Only as a care of. The goal really is not to govern well for the ordinary Ghanaian. That is not the goal. The politicians, when they get power, everything changes from the way they see things when they were in opposition and now that they are in government. It's simply because, we are not governing because of the common good. That is not the goal. We genuinely don't love ourselves. It is not really our intention that it will be well with every Ghanaian and all of that. I think that is quite basic. In terms of a reset, I'm not too sure that if we have to wait for politicians to take the lead, it will not happen.
Correct.
It will not happen.
No.
That's my considered view. It will not happen.
So and I think it was Dr. Kojo Asante who asked the question at the beginning, that can we leave it to the politicians to start the process, or can we compel them?
No.
And could you let me come back to you because you asked that question?
Yeah.
What's your answer to that?
So, yeah, and I think, for me, the two questions are important. If we want to continue with multi-party democracy, then there are certain assumptions. So whatever you do, multi-party democracy means you have multiple parties, you can have independent candidates, whatever. But the characteristics they exhibit as parties must then reflect in governance. At the moment, everything that happens in the party tells you that you're going to have bad governance.
Yeah.
Every aspect of how parties are organized, the political corruption that goes on there, even the management. So the party, outside of mobilizing for elections, is non-existent. You are not getting policy dialogues. You don't hear when there's going to be a conference of the party that you are going to have policy debate. Ideas about how to address the thousands of people that get killed on the streets of Ghana every year. You're not going to hear how are you going to tackle corruption. You're not going to hear any of those things in the parties. Why would you think that those same people who get elected or appointed out of those systems would then go and take over the state and somehow will now be focused on the public welfare? Even the welfare of their own members is not there. So the reset has to start from the parties because that's the source of your problem. The monetization and all of that leads to a whole range of policy incoherence. People just do policies because there's a procurement opportunity attached to it. And that is the whole public service related with that. So you don't understand why a certain policy is being pursued, because when you take any policy analysis and you look at the inputs and the outcomes, you're like, why are we spending millions on this? So on that side of the question is how are you going to get reform at the party level? Because without that, the water is poison, the process is poison. What you're going to get out of it is going to be poison. Then on the accountability side, which is a huge problem, is that if you take what happened, for example, with the Bank of Ghana basically violating its own laws and funding the government.
Yep.
Everybody in the finance committee knew, everybody in parliament knew that this has been done, and yet nobody has been held responsible, right? So what is going to prevent the next governor from doing the same thing if he comes to the same position? What is the deterrent effect on any politician that is elected or appointed to mess up the economy and just walk away free? Because after this year, whoever was involved in messing up the economy, they go home.
Yeah.
They are going to still, some of them will get their ex gratia, I believe.
All of them will.
So we have created a system where there's really no incentive for accountability. Wonderful. No incentive for you to restrain yourself when you have to make decisions that can be reckless, that can completely impoverish people, like what we've done with all the haircuts, destroy people's savings. And when you are done, you just walk away. So there is something missing in the accountability structure, which we need to address. Otherwise, I don't understand, and my last example. We set up a gift-made system, which is supposed to help us regulate the way we spend monies and track and all of that. If the Minister of Finance comes and says, only 30% of transactions go through gift-mix, and then Parliament says, beautiful, this is the appropriations. I have given you all the money. Parliament doesn't make a condition that if we don't see an increase in the number of transactions that goes through gift mix, because that is how we are going to be physically disciplined, we are not giving you any money. No. So what is the incentive for the finance minister to put transactions through gift mix?
Yeah.
You see, so there are real challenges with accountability and the incentives around it for the political class. And if we don't fix that, we will not be able to overcome the challenges. People are not angels. if they fail because the party is corrupt or they've created a corrupt culture, we cannot expect that somehow they will carry and come and become angels. So if we want to restrain them...
So first fix the political parties.
At least...
And have a reset at the political party
But even
level.
if that is not happening, make sure that you have the right incentives within the governance structure to be able to hold people accountable.
Prof, how do you achieve that?
You know...
And how radical must it be?
Right. What Kojo has said, absolutely true. But the problem is what you just asked. How do we achieve it? For me, within the present context of our politics, we cannot achieve it. We cannot even change that. Because, you see, the Constitution has created this system, and we respect that. The people who have been elected to operationalize the Constitution, and by and large, they will claim to be working on the basis of the Constitution. And for Ghana, we have 20,000 or 100,000 lawyers, and they can point out to you that this is unconstitutional or this is it is. So for me, we cannot leave it to the political elite, the political parties, to bring about change. I think civil society, and we've been working, Kojo and others have been working for decades on this. We still don't get a change. And I can tell you, this can continue for the next 100 years if we do not, as a people, decide to change course. So for me, I see a real need to reform the Constitution in the first place. Well, some people think we don't need to reform it because the people who are working on it, they are the bad ones. No, it's partly true, partially true, I should say. We need to have a Constitution that can restructure the way we do our politics and the way we govern ourselves. All these are coming from how we have structured our politics and how we govern ourselves. We need to change that because inherent in the current structure and system are the challenges that you and I are discussing. A president is given almost unlimited powers. Even though if you talk to the president, they will tell you, you think I'm powerful. I'm constrained by A, B, C, D, which is true in many ways. But by and large, they have these wide discretionary powers. A president can order or cancel, even including having public holidays. They can declare that through their cabinet, and you have majority in parliament. You get your public holidays, okay? So I think the Constitution should be restructured to take power away from the center to the communities, the districts. That should be the basis of democratic practice. We are practicing democracy at the top and neglecting the bottom. And the bottom is the true meaning of democracy. When Abraham Lincoln said, government for the people, by the people, he was talking about local politics and local democracy. We don't do that. So once you concentrate so much power at the center, then the few people that you elect to be in charge of that system will be the ones dictating and controlling everything. And this is what is happening in Ghana. In terms of resource control, in terms of major decisions affecting our lives, everything is from this place.
Right? For example, manifestos, and not to help you, Prof.
Yeah, sure.
We have moved from a place where manifestos move from manifesto documents straight to implementation.
Yes.
Bypass the entire governance system. So I can take free SHS on paper and take it straight to Ministry of Education and start implementing.
Yeah, that's right.
I wouldn't even go to Parliament. I wouldn't even have conversation with citizens, with stakeholders, as to, okay, can we tweak it? Can we? Because we feel that
it's our policy. But it's the nation's policy.
And we've seen the effects, the amount of monies that we have spent. Yeah. You know, if we had even had a discussion about free SHS, maybe we would have tweaked it a little bit, and then, you know, we would have had a better outcome. So the tendencies and the characteristics are getting worse because there's centralization. Local government has been completely ineffective for decades.
And it's in the Constitution. There's a whole chapter on decentralization.
So if people can get their basic needs, your rubbish picked up, your water, your electricity, at your local level, why are you worried about something that is going on in Accra. But because there's nothing there, somebody whose pothole in the local area is affected is asking the president
to come and
fix it. Yeah. Let me get to Prof. Buckman. Give me the economist's view on how you achieve this reset.
Well, I think that we cannot wait for the political elite to do the reset because they are the ultimate beneficiaries. They won't set themselves up for failure. They won't do that. At some point, I think I favor some level of positive disruption. Right. The reason I say so is that, and it has to come down to the ordinary Ghanaian. For a good leader who means well and driven by the common good can achieve desirable results with the current constitution, if you mean well. Our human weakness is prone to evil, and therefore we tend to take advantage of the present system. That's what we are seeing here. If you look at Kenya, they have worked with the constitution for a while. That creates some level of dissatisfaction. But when people went on the street, the president responded and made changes. The first point was actually not the constitution. So it depends on what we are asking for. What do we want?
Yeah.
What do we want from our politicians? All these things are happening because we have allowed it.
That's true.
I'll give you a couple of examples. A couple of years ago, or maybe more than 4 years ago or so, Parliament was thinking about a new chamber. You remember that story?
Yes.
Some group of people said, drop the chamber.
Yeah.
And what happened?
They dropped it.
Let me tell you, politicians are afraid of the people. All these things are happening because you and I, we have been asleep comfortably. And part of the problem we see here is the missing middle class. Okay? Where we felt that, okay, our comfort zone is intact. But now we have seen that with domestic debt exchange and the rest of them, actually, if you see the current crisis, if you look at the data, it's a leveling up crisis. It's a crisis that has affected the middle class more than actually those down there. If you look at the data, you will see that lower middle income poverty is very high and upper middle income poverty is very high. And it's been rising from 2021, 2022, 2023. And if you look at the projections, okay, and all of that. So I think that we have allowed it. We have sustained a certain conversation in the last 2.5 years about government size. Evans, what do you see? You see the two main political parties responding.
Yeah.
And even telling that they will not have more than 40 ministers. They will not have more than 60. I think we have allowed it. We have allowed it. What do we want? Let's ask for that. Let's demand for that. And I think that, look, in any serious jurisdiction, what the people need is actually not an apology from the government that has created this mess. They will ask you to resign. In fact, you even resign. And I don't think that this apology from the finance minister is sufficient. The president of the nation must demonstrate that. And the reason I'm saying that this apology, for me, means nothing. Of course, we can acknowledge the minister for coming out to do that. Let me tell you something, Evans. If Ghana had proactively reached out to the IMF in 2021, there would have been no need for haircuts.
Yeah.
That is established.
And many of you warned and actually said that at the time, like, go now. Or else you're going in an ambulance where you are almost on life support and about to die.
The data was clear. You don't need to be a prophet. It was arrogance, pride, self-interest, political interest that sacrificed the common good. That's why we are here. In our history, this is the pricey economic recovery and the most expensive economic recovery in our history. You know, Evans, when you look at the data, let's not joke about it. It's going to take us decades to get out of this. At this present rate and the level of governance on the table, That is not going to change. And I will tell you why. If you look at the domestic debt exchange and you look at the external debt restructuring, it's just to buy space whilst the IMF program is in force. After 2026, there will be no way the country will be able to sustain its debt and optimally allocate to priority spending in the area of health, education, agric, in a manner that will benefit the ordinary Ghanaian. That is not going to happen.
I mean, I listen to you talk, and I get goosebumps because you're thinking about doomsday scenario, and you almost suggest that the current politics that we are practicing will not get us out, even at the end of the IMF program.
It will not. You and I will be here. Let me tell you something.
But that's scary.
At the energy sector alone, Evans, if you look at the energy sector alone, in terms of the energy sector shortfall, that lies ahead of us from now to 2027, 2028, if you do the forecast. And you look at the maturity clustering of the domestic debt exchange, we are looking at more than 33 billion cedis in 2027, about 34 billion cedis in 2028. How would the country prepare for that? If you are thinking of setting up a sinking fund today, there's a trade-off. If you look at the growth projections, Evans, from now to 2029 is insufficient. It's insufficient. That's the reality.
And I see Prof Bafo has something to say, Prof.
Yeah. You see, the reasons my good friend has given is precisely why I think that the resetting is so important. And the resetting, for me, means that we have to begin to find a way out of this partisanship politics that we play. The partisanship in our politics. And we can only get rid of it by conceiving a new political system. See, in South Africa, they have it in their constitution. If you don't win the majority, you are forced into coalition.
Which is what we saw ANC do recently.
Exactly. And I'm waiting to see the outcome of that, probably to help the country. Because now all stakeholders, all parties are part of the government. Ghana needs something like that. I don't care whether you call it union government, unity government, whatever, because for the next 20 years, as he's saying, and as I agree with him, also on the political side, I agree that there's a need for change. We need to agree as a people, a consensus on creating a unified government. You see, because NDC comes, they cannot fix this problem alone.
Yeah.
And they have only 4 years, at most 8 years. You go away, a new government comes, and we have to reset. This ding-dong game that we play, and Kwaku Kwarteng rightly put it as a Ponzi scheme, is what we need to get rid of. We can only get rid of that when we come together as a people with the one vision that for the next 20 years at least, we have this vision to rebuild our economy, which means we have to be focusing on a self-reliant economy rather than this dependency economy that we have created.
There'll be short-term pain, but long-term there'll be gains.
Precisely. So you look at the short-term, the medium-term, and the long-term. You have a strategy for that. Nobody can say that we need to cut ourselves away from the IMF. We can't, because we are trapped. And the danger is that the more they entice us with restructuring the debt and going to make a deal for this and that, the deeper the entrapment becomes. There's going to be a time when we cannot even get out of the trap. So I think it's better for us to create that union platform for all of us to decide that, look, as a people, partisanship cannot help us anymore. We need to come together.
But Prof says, for this to happen, there must be some level of disruption.
Yes.
I mean, and the question then becomes for me, how radical should that disruption be?
It's got to be radical, because what he's saying and what I believe, and Kwaku Kwarteng said it right, on this trajectory, it will be massive destruction in the end. Yeah. We can be like Argentina in the 80s or 90s, when the country went completely bankrupt. And we are bankrupt already. You see? Yeah. So this partisanship of, I will come out, do this, and what is even saddening for me is that today, these politicians who want to gain power to become president, they are still promising goodies to everybody.
Yes.
Even in the midst of the crisis that Prof is just painting.
Yes, they are still promising.
And that is where, for me, that's my first question about, are we ready for, or are they ready for change? Is that I am expecting to see that the problem that we are talking about, even down the line, 1 year or 2 years down the line, that you are actually putting, or you are behaving as if you appreciate the seriousness of the problem, and that everything that you are doing is responding to that seriousness. So if I see that you are appointing your majority leader as chairman of ECG at a time when you are battling Dumso, the guy is doing full-time as majority leader. And in the crisis, when you know how important, if you look at the Afrobarometer Insight report, when they look at the drivers of dissatisfaction, one of the things that is statistically significant is the provision of electricity.
Yeah.
Because you know what energy does to the economy. So even symbolically, it suggests to me that you are not ready for prime time.
Yeah.
That you are in a bubble. You are living somewhere. So all these gimmicks that we see, all the promises, somebody's giving tax waivers, and I'm like, which
creating more.
Where is the money?
$400 million worth.
You are already struggling to raise revenue in an economy that you ask every small business are struggling. People are struggling to even keep their stores and things open. And you are saying that, somehow you are going. So if politicians are not going to be truthful with us, and that's the thing, I think, when we talk about civic disruption and we talk about all of society organization, and Prof talked about the middle class, after the way people's savings and investments have been completely,
wiped out.
You can't even force a conversation and say, just be truthful with us. Because this thing that you are playing with, by the time we get to 2026, 2027, it's going to be really bad.
Yeah.
So we want to see now. It's not later. Now, what plans do we have for economic recovery?
You're not talking about that.
Cocoa board. In debt. It cannot even supply its cocoa that it has already collected money for. Right? Look at what has happened to our oil and gas sector. The things that we even rely on for generating revenue, not to talk about all the things, highfalutin things that we talk about to get revenue. So I want to see, when you say what I want to see evidence now. You remember when we were mobilizing as Citizen Coalition, when this crisis, we were always making the point. It is not the IMF, is not the silver bullet. The IMF gives you a platform, but what are we putting in place for economic recovery between now and, don't tell me sinking fund, right? Because, as you said, it's opportunity cost. If you are not growing the economy to kind of increase your revenue, by the time those interest rates begin to bite, where are you going to find the money?
Yeah.
So there has to be a serious conversation. That's why when we are saying, okay, the manifestos are coming, all of those things. But what are we hearing from the candidates themselves or the aspirants currently as to how are they going to progress us from physical stability and all of that to actual economic recovery?
Prof says it will eventually ultimately come down to the people.
Sure.
What the people do.
Sure.
And he says, obviously, civil disruption of the kind, and of course, everybody's now is signaling what happened in Kenya. For us, we have an election. Should we just simply wait and vote on December? Because that obviously will yield either MPP or NDC anyway. So really, what's the way out here? Because that grim picture he paints sends goosebumps, because he lays the path and you don't see any way out for the next 20 years. That means my children, possibly my grandchildren, would have to somehow...
You are thinking about your grandchildren.
You suffer before.
You will suffer
As for me, I'm already in it.
But
because I was always nearly wiped out with the DDEP.
You know, the compact,
so
Professor K.Y. Mwakun's compact for Ghana, which aims to try to mobilize this whole of society to have a new social contract that is reflected in the commitments, political commitments of all the parties and other people. For me, I found that, but it has to have that kind of pressure.
Do you feel that Ghanaians are ready to do what it takes to force the politicians to effect the change and the reset that we require?
My experience so far suggests not.
Okay.
I think people are just holding their breath for elections.
But Prof, isn't that the problem?
And that is,
even the people,
and that is the...
And I agree, the sentiment is people are just become very numb and nobody wants to move.
Yeah, and I think this discussion is indicating that we don't need to wait till we get to be a Kenya. We don't want people to be.
There's a sense that Ghanaians will never get to the Kenya.
Oh, please, that's a false sense. It is past when the
because what we went through with DDEP and we still are fine.
Well,
Kenya is doing well, actually, compared to Ghana. It is heaven.
All the indicators are great.
I mean, exactly, you know that. Yeah. And yet, they demanded that. We were at 54% inflation. And we didn't but annihilate. We were fine. You travel to the country and anybody's going about their duty. Would it ever happen?
What duty did they go about?
Well, I mean, we say we are magicians, but we find a way to live and be happy.
But more seriously, I think it is possible for that social eruption. We don't have to think of coup d'etat. I don't believe it will happen. Yeah. It's society itself that will revolt against the political class. So for us, we are warning the political class, as Kojo was saying, that look, let's take the measures now. That's for me, I keep saying, look, some semblance or a real union government, bringing all parties together, plus the civil society, and other, to have a government that will rule for the next 20 years, to put this economy right. You know what? One of the things that I think our economists will help us is how we gradually wean ourselves from the tentacles of the global economy. That is the bottom, is at the bottom of our predicament in terms of our economy. You cannot develop your country on charity. No. And this country is blessed with so much resources, both human and material, to have the brains to begin to see that, in fact, there's so much we can do here to limit.
You remind me of a slogan in 2017 called Ghana Beyond Aid.
Oh, and I'll confess, when Nana Akufo-Addo announced that, I was with Jima, and we celebrated. Frankly, even Jima thought he could write something to the Jubilee House to see how we can help. Then all of a sudden, we heard that Osaf Mafu has been made chairman of a certain committee. I laughed. That was a serious proposal by the government because ultimately it was going to mean limiting our dependence on the global economy. So we don't have to be going back to the IMF every 4 or 5 years. It's been a cycle, the 17th, 18th time. And yet we are not thinking of how we get out of that. You see, that's what disturbs me. Yeah. Because people are elected, they go into power, and their main concern is how they hold on to that and how they benefit from that. That's why I think Bopkin was saying the right things about.
Prof. Bopkin, thank you. This conversation will revisit it. And we need to have enough of these conversations in the lead up to the elections. Get the awakening required to get people very aware. Well, when the politicians come to you to campaign, you should be asking those hard questions. I know they will bring you the 50 CDs and buy the bread and all those things. But we hope that when you have these conversations enough, a few of you will begin to ask those hard questions when they come door to door to campaign to you. That's the only way we get them to do the right things because they know you will not stand for it anymore. Prof, I'll call on you again, Professor Bopkin. We'll return to have this conversation once more. Dr. Kojo Asante, thank you very much. And Professor Jima Boyede, you've been doing this for decades, and you're still doing it. And thank you for coming. Exactly. Enjoy the rest of your evening.